All right, I'm going to get this meeting started because we have a lot to discuss tonight, and I want to make sure we have the time to do it, hopefully within the 2 hours, and hopefully we don't stay too much longer afterwards, but there is a lot. My next message is to the community who's out there. Many of you, I recognize all of your faces, so I think you know, many of you know, but for those of you who do not know, this was an added meeting on the work that we did about a week and a half ago to 2 weeks ago. We really began to identify the goals. We started to think about what could be some of the strategies. There's a quick shift to move into subcommittee groups that mirrored the goals that were established at the last meeting. These subcommittees from the planning committee formed, have all met, have taken the work we did just those 2 weeks ago and are now coming back tonight to present it in front of the larger planning committee group and to further refine it. The work that happens tonight will then be presented to the community next week in the public meeting, so that the community can go through all of this and again, as with every step of this, add their thinking, comments, etc. But with this introduction, the fact of the matter is this meeting will really be the planning committee working among themselves. The microphone will not be on because this is a working committee for them to finish their work. As with all these meetings, at the end of the community, we welcome you to have a moment to speak, and I will make sure that we leave time for that. Even if this group is still talking, we'll pause at that point. But again, just wanted to clarify, what will be happening tonight is, and I'll run through the agenda, we're beginning to create just some of the deliverables, just summaries from the meetings that have taken place. And again, the stakeholder summary that I had talked about last week, I just want to make sure that we'll talk to the community, or that LPC, that they've looked at that. And then we're going through some pieces. We want to talk about a project request form and what that means and how that'll be used, and again, to the committee, but this will be important for the public at large. Then we really get into this work session. And we've got the groups, the waterfront, livable communities, which is really about the mixed use development, transportation, food, and I'm forgetting which one? Jobs. Jobs, of course, and jobs. Simplified. And then we're also going to add in an update from the housing task force, because again, that is aligned with this work, and we decided that it will be important. So again, there'll be a lot to get to. And after that, we have what was on the agenda for the last meeting, which are the preliminary project profiles, the key ones from the submission, the application. And again, we've got it on the map here, along with potential areas and other ideas, preliminary thinking. It would be great to get at the end of this meeting to talk about these, confirm that these are the priorities that that we're working forward, because our consultant team is already beginning to vet these projects. We want to make sure that we're all in agreement with that. And if there's any other areas, I'll talk about what we've identified. And from the planning committee, if there's other opportunities that we want to get out there, up here and talking about, and we'll list them. And again, just so that we can make sure that we're making progress as quickly as possible. And also, however, making sure that we're on the right track. So that is essentially the agenda for this evening. I'll talk quickly about the public meeting next week. And then we will, after the public speaks, we will close or go back and finish our work with the planning committee. And everyone's welcome to stay, but before 8 o'clock, the community will have an opportunity to speak, as with all of these meetings. And again, so with that said, before we really get into the meat of this, the committee has received the meeting summary from LPC meeting number 2, a week and a half ago. The stakeholder summary, the last meeting we had the list. We sent out a summary of all of those interviews. Again, this is not a complete document, but just so that everyone understands what we're hearing, what's happened in those interviews. Wanted that opportunity for you to see that. Once we finish, and this, again, is one of the announcements on December 7th and 8th next week, we're going to try to get additional stakeholder meetings that have been identified, scheduled. Just because those dates do close, there's always, our consultant team is always open to speak with any stakeholder who wants to participate. And that would be done by phone. And again, would likely be depending on what their interest or concern, issue, opportunity is. We would align with the appropriate team member on our team. So just as a note, and speak to me tonight at the end of this meeting. If there's anyone you think I should be speaking to, I will reach out to them immediately tomorrow to see if I can get that scheduled, and if not, in person on the phone. So with that, we've got the project request form. And Sheena, would you like to, Sheena did so much work on pulling to a project request form, but she's stepping back. Crystal. Crystal, would you like to just discuss? I mean, it's fairly simple. Okay, I got that clear. It is, what we're doing, and this was hugely helpful from Crystal. We reviewed it just with the chairs and our team, revised it to make it fit for everything we think we need in Hudson. This project form is, once we approve it this evening and the next day as you go through it, this is the project form that can be sent out to anyone or any project opportunity that you have identified. Some have been trickling in. This is also going to be presented, and there'll be copies of it at the public meeting next week, and also access to it online. It is essentially what, if there is a project, all of the information we would need for it to be considered. It's a lengthy document or form, as those who are looking at it or have looked at it, and it's important because, again, that we always say with this, this isn't, the DRI is not about good ideas, it's about projects that can be implemented within a 2-year time frame. And so we need to, this form is the first vetting to really understand that everything is in place. And so the due date for this will be January 3rd. I'm not looking at it right now, but I believe, and it's January 3rd. And all of the project profile forms, when they're completed, will be sent to the consultant team, and that will be to my email address, steve.carney@stantec.com. Again, that's all in the form. Everybody will have access to this form. But what I'd like to say is, if you haven't looked at it, for tonight, look at it. If there's anything that you think might need to be added to it, you can let us know, and we'll finalize it, and it'll be ready to go. It's essentially fairly close, though. So if there's somebody or a project that you're talking about, we should get that in front of the individual who would be leading in terms of implementation. Now, with that, we're actually quickly getting back into the whole reason why we're here tonight, and it is to go through the work that the subcommittees have done. For each of them, and I've seen half of the work, I have not seen all of it, but what I've seen so far has been impressive, and what I'm hoping to do this evening is for the chair of the subcommittee to speak. At first, identify the goal, and most of you, I think, have refined it, if not anyone. But again, this is a working session, so we're going to work on what we've gotten to. And then we are going to go through the core strategies that this subcommittee has identified, and I want to spend about 10 to 15 minutes, 15 minutes if we can, but we're adding housing, so now fairly as concise as we can, to really identify any other potential strategies, areas of strategies that can be turned into strategies that align with these, so that the committee as a whole has an opportunity to weigh in on each of these areas. And with that, if we're all in agreement, I have waterfront at the top of my list, but I don't, we can, alrighty. So, and by the way, I'm sorry, just because this is a working session, passing this microphone all around I don't think will be effective. So let's try without the microphone at this point, and we'll go from there.
The waterfront subcommittee has met twice. Our goal is one connected waterfront. Very simple, very basic. Our strategies, the Dunn warehouse and the property adjacent to that, we want to preserve, restore, and enhance Dunn and the contiguous property, including that ridge to the north, which is now a gravel parking lot. The Saratoga study that was done a number of years ago really captures the essential parameters of what can and should happen at this site. So I think we should use that as a really good guideline for what can be accomplished there. We would also like to see a developer put in 2 to 3 complementary structures on the ridge, which is that northern site, that complement Dunn. This is part of our original LWRP, and we think it would appeal to a developer. In addition, we'd see that in the Dunn building and in these other ancillary buildings, we could put in, they would be for public use. They could also be small shops, job creation, accessibility, a year-round farmer's market, perhaps commercial kitchens, things like that. Waterfront access is obviously a priority. We want to promote and enhance public access and the meaningful interaction with the waterfront for pedestrians, bikers, boaters, vehicles, and improve access from both land and water. We do not have docking here, public docking in Hudson on our waterfront. So we want to improve connectivity to the waterfront. We want to build a continuous trail or path along the river that connects the north and south bays, includes Promenade Hill and Riverfront Park, and connect where possible to the CLC, Empire Trail, those projects that are being considered right now, so that it's one continuous pathway from north, or ability to get from one end to the other, north to south. Let's see, creating a public pier will be key to maximize dockage, improve water access, encourage more visitors by water, and we want to expand and beautify the area that's actually adjacent to the salt shed. There is a shallow, quite a deep inset there that we could actually put some great docking. We want to improve and beautify the Fergary site. Am I saying that right? Is it Fergary or is it Fergary? Fergary? Fergary. No. Okay, thank you. We want to improve and beautify the Fergary site, restoring at least one of the shacks that's either erected now or salvaged from remaining buildings. Build a boardwalk connecting the Fergary site to North Bay and the proposed CLC and Empire Trails, and include wayfinding signage and some historical information. Develop and improve the Second Street steps. We weren't really sure if this was in the purview of the waterfront, but it's access to the waterfront, so we thought it was important to include. So improve the Second Street steps as a viable way to connect the north and south parts of town, and a bridge district loop connecting Tanner's Lane, the Wick, and Second Street steps into Second Public Square. And there's one thing I neglected to put on here, which is we're suggesting that we move, that's called Water Street, to between the Dunn Building and the railroad tracks. So we can eliminate that little piece of road that goes up along Riverfront Park and connect that in a green way to the Dunn site. So it's not bisected by that little road there. So that's where we are. And thank you, committee, for working so hard.
What is the discussion about the railroad tracks?
The railroad tracks.
The crossing site.
That sort of, yeah. Look, is Jeff here?
No, I think that fell under waterfront and our purview.
That was waterfront?
Yeah.
There is certainly concern about the heavy industrial use at the waterfront and trucks, people, cars, bikes, all coming into contact with one another at the Broad Street crossing. So if there's a way to move that Broad Street crossing further south, I know the mayor was very helpful in giving us some history there, but if it's possible to move that farther south, we would like to see that considered, but I think that's a transportation.
Any questions, comments from the rest of the committee? Any areas, thoughts, ideas that you might have expressed? That
I just have two comments on moving Water Street to between the Dunn warehouse and the railroad tracks. One is that the railroad property actually extends out pretty far, so we have to see.
I think it goes to the chain link.
It does.
So I think there's a.
And then my other concern is the infrastructure, water lines, sewer lines that run under the street. So we would just have to figure out how that would work, or they would need to be moved, which could be a much costlier project.
That business of moving Water Street has not been thoroughly vetted. We just thought it was a good suggestion worth considering.
Yeah, it definitely makes it.
There may be,
How much for your green space?
there might be all kinds of logistical reasons why it doesn't work.
And part of the water sewer development is that we feel that if we can get that moved to a done building, the developer come in and see that it's already there, and the permitting process would be less contentious probably to get it all done, so they can just focus on what they need to do, not to worry about all the permitting it is to take to get the water and sewer to the done building.
So,
to that, and what I might suggest is that one of the strategies be focus on infrastructure as a central part of any waterfront development, so that it's a part and parcel to whatever projects come about, right? So,
I think that's gonna be true with every project, isn't it? Infrastructure is always gonna be.
not necessarily. I mean, if we talk about housing stuff and talk about mixed-use development of a pre-existing structure, you're not talking about redoing street grids and the underlying infrastructure. There's certainly some element for every building, but I don't think it's as prominent as it is with the waterfront when you're talking about such a large geographic area with lots of overlay. So can I just ask about the goal? So I love the goal. It's very to the point. But I just want to play devil's advocate, maybe challenge it a little bit. So one connected waterfront to what end? What's behind that connected waterfront? Is it access to the water for recreation? Is it access to the water for business? Is it access to the water for residents, tourists?
Yes.
Right? Right, all of that, right? So connected to me says one thing, but I don't know, thinking is the other half of the connectedness of it. So that when we get to the point where we're looking at projects, the projects can stand behind that goal and say, okay, this is the part of that goal, whether it's tourists or residents or something, and that's why it's a good fit, not just because it's connected.
So connected perhaps isn't the right word.
No, I think it is, because maybe there is some stuff that makes it all disconnected. But like when you said, for example, you didn't know if the Second Street steps were under the purview of waterfront, I'd say they are, because it's connecting the different neighborhoods to the waterfront in a more holistic way, right? That maybe goes to access for the residents who live there to more easily and safely access the waterfront, as opposed to a boat launch, which might be for somebody who comes in from out of town, who's then going to spend money at the new small shops that are there in the Dunn building, right? So sort of putting it all together and thinking about how those things tie, so they become, from a project level, more viable and more supportable if we have to defend them for their the rationale behind them and the funding that's being requested. So
what are you suggesting?
What about the word integration?
I'm not necessarily suggesting that you change that word. I'm suggesting that you put a second phrase in that goal. Right. So additional meat on the bone.
Okay. Well, we do have the opportunity for thoughtful redevelopment and natural resource conservation for the North Bay development. That is in that little, under the one connected waterfront. As the potential for land use changes at our waterfront becomes closer to a reality, we would like to see the opportunity for thoughtful redevelopment and natural resource conservation from the North Bay development.
We also focused on the west side of the train tracks, so nothing sort of on the other side. Is that correct, Steve? Do we have parameters? Should we, I mean, one of the questions is, Basilica was part of the DRI. Should we be thinking about that? I don't know what committee that fell under and other things like that. I mean, is that tied to the waterfront? So that's, I was unclear how.
We were very unclear about
Well, much like the steps, I mean, if you think about, these, strategy goals, there's nothing wrong with them overlapping, or, one project, potential project falling within two of these goals, these strategy areas. So from that perspective, if the connection, of course, you can go to the other side of the, of the tracks.
If our group confined ourselves to just the area west of the tracks, we'd be looking at a very small sliver.
Exactly. But and again, as we define all of these, we pull them all together, it's still a draft, right? And so this will go out to the community. It will still be further refined by everyone on the team as we get deeper into this.
And can we continue to add more things of different scale? I mean, these are pretty, sort of, some of them higher value.
Yes, but I want to make sure that we get, and we'll work too as a team, and everyone on our team. I want to make sure that we have something fairly close to what this committee is proposing, for the public event next week. So that's important, but we can still shape it. One thing I want to clarify: a pier versus docking. Is that all one and the same? Is that because often you can think of a pedestrian pier that's just really simply something that juts out that might be less expensive, easier to do, could be potentially.
Well, I think we were really hoping to maximize the ability for people to dock.
It's deep water.
It is deep.
Yeah.
That'd be
At least
cool, yeah.
for the-
But it's
It should be both.
So it should be both.
Could be a pier with docking, so,
Yeah.
right.
is this next on my list.
Betsy,
Yes.
boat club? I missed that in our revision here?
We didn't really talk about that in our committee meeting, unless you all talked about it on Monday night. Moving the boat club?
Yeah,
I know it's in the LWRP,
okay.
but I didn't put it in because I didn't think it had been discussed, but perhaps I missed something.
Yeah, well, it came in the tail end of our conversation as a possibility, and it was in the LWRP, and what that would mean and how that would all happen, and is that part of that impact case? It was something we all discussed, and,
I will add it
it
to
was
it.
a point.
Oh, no, that won't be controversial at all. Yeah, Betsy said, that's not Betsy's idea.
All right, does anybody else have anything on the waterfront? Waterfront, anybody else have any other follow-up on waterfront?
Livable communities?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I have to thank Sheena. I know she's had some accolades earlier, but I owe her on this one. I was fairly mobile this week. We had a conference call prior to the holiday, and then we've had some follow-up email exchanges. We're a lean and mean committee, so open for suggestions from the group here. And a draft goal statement was the goal of the Living Communities Committee is to promote civic engagement, pride, and a sense of place in the Bridge District through safe, sustainable choices for housing, transportation, education, cultural diversity, enrichment, and recreation. And so we were really looking at what are holistic components for activities, and also the idea of inclusiveness amongst neighborhoods, populations, and individuals that we see sometimes there's barriers to, and trying to really be more open and holistic in the mindset that there's different spectrums of how the programs can work and be applied to, whether it's funding or whether it's actually services. So some of the strategies we talked about was creating and advancing a broad campaign to encourage the diversification and introduction of housing options. So not only price points, but also rent versus own, communal or shared, just being very open and flexible to either creating new solutions or highlighting the diversity of solutions depending on the community or the individuals that are needing residences or homes. Providing loans, grants, and technical assistance to new and existing businesses, and the thought process there was really the idea of an incubator without walls or an information clearinghouse for entrepreneurs and residents to address the challenges of staying in a community, creating in a community, thriving in a community, and that can be for housing, but that can also be for entrepreneurial purposes, but also community groups with social missions and community-minded opportunities.
So before we move on to the next one, if I can just add to that, not just for businesses, but we talked about it from the standpoint of homeowners as well. Particularly people who own homes in older housing stock in that community might want to take advantage of owner-occupied historic tax credit programs or other home improvement programs that need to be administered by an entity, and CEDC might also come in as a partner on the small business side to help provide added capacity as it relates to their small business administration loan programs and other things. So a lot of stuff mixed up in that for both businesses and homeowners.
Provide some targeted planning, innovation incentives and marketing assistance to start up minority and women-owned businesses. So having some standalone wraparound services that don't currently exist for some of the population. facilitate access to available public and private financing and funding for homeowners and business owners. So beyond just the technical assistance and the clearinghouse of information, a real kind of one-stop shop for accessing new capital. So not just the technical assistance side, but also the accessing to funding. Explore existing and maybe new not-for-profit partnerships to expand the local capacity to deliver resources, which Matt was talking about. You know, so we have CEDC, we have HDC, we have Habitat, Galvan, Hawthorne, but really looking at, you know, are there new collaborative relationships, or should we be thinking about forming some new entities or inviting some startups to address the gaps that are happening or have happened? Enhance community and public engagement through smart city technology. And this is something that's come out of kind of best practice in livable communities that we've seen as illustrations. And it does get to that E in the Bridge District of empowerment. So I know in the DRI there have been discussions of community Wi-Fi. You know, we've been talking about how do we really start bridging mixed media and electronic interfacing, as well as hard media. This might be a way to start bridging some of that. Empower individuals to develop and enhance skill sets. And this gets to some of the workforce development stuff we've been talking about. Through the creation of legible pathways. And those pathways are more than just the physical TOD that we've been talking about, the Empire Path or sidewalks or, you know, intermodal, but really pathways to educational resources, social resources, and capacity building resources. I mean, really starting to think of how we create a culture of inclusiveness and how we use this opportunity to give the community new capacity to help solve its own problems and take care of itself and have regenerative long-term strategies beyond the DRI and the funding that we're talking about right now. Encourage and incentivize mixed-use development. And the discussion there was, you know, to think about that with transportation, hubs, and existing resources and nodes, but also to think about it as reducing vehicle dependency and encouraging a walking, livable community. So when you start thinking about mixed use, yes, the residents, but then what are the other commercial opportunities happening on a streetscape, and how do we get the residents of the community physically interfacing with that? And then the last thing was to protect and enhance stewardship of public green spaces. That would strengthen community pride, help protect fringe areas from overdevelopment, create healthy walkable connections. So that's that whole idea of making sure you have the community pedestrian planning in place that encourages, you know, some one-on-one interaction of residents and their environment.
Having sat in on that first call, I think this is another good example where, you know, for this one's a little bit broader and there's going to be strategies that overlap.
Right.
Without a doubt. You know, the pathways to resources is a great example of connectivity and just, you know, in different minds, you know, different mechanisms. So I think that's.
Yeah, and to that point of overlapping, I think one of the things we talked about on the call was the idea that some of these strategies and the goal here would be that the other, the projects would be looked at with sort of a brief checklist of livable community things that you don't have to meet all the criteria, but maybe you rank a little bit higher or lower based on how many of those livable community items, the strategies or the goals that you hit. So that's what can come out of this conversation, is a sort of development of what that little checklist might be.
Yeah, and it was a spectrum.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, some of the individual elements would be appropriate as filters or to be placed, and some wouldn't. It wouldn't all fit 100%, but
Yeah.
it was that idea of giving yourself that spectrum across evaluating projects and plans.
Would you mind
just rereading your goal state, the goal?
The goal of the Livable Communities Subcommittee, or the goal itself, is to promote civic engagement, pride, and a sense of place in the Bridge District through safe, sustainable choices for housing, transportation, education, cultural diversity, enrichment, and recreation.
So I think the one modification we should make to this, having thought about it a little bit more, is in the Bridge District and surrounding neighborhoods. Because I think we're, trying to create this sense of connectivity between the boundary line and